I'd like to kick off this morning's plenary. The title is Shale Gas or Efficiency for Competitiveness and Energy Security. Last week, the European Commission published a new energy security strategy for Europe, which sets out a long list of short-term, medium-term, and long-term actions to reduce dependence on Russian gas, among other objectives. Now, there are a multiple number of options on the table and actions that have been presented, from regional stress tests for supply disruption to new infrastructure projects, as well as energy efficiency and renewables, renewable energy as part of the activities. However, there have been quite a lot of criticisms of this new strategy, as for some too much emphasis is given on the supply side and on shale gas and gas per se, and not enough emphasis has been given to energy efficiency and renewables. With us today we have three people who've been invited to speak on the panel. Our first speaker is Claude Turmes, who's a member of the European Parliament and who's been a member of the Parliament since 1999. And since 2002 has been Vice President of the Green EFA group in the Parliament. Our next speaker is András Tóth from the European Commission in the Energy Efficiency Unit of DG Energy, where András has been there since 2005. And our third speaker is Helen Axelsen, who's working for, I don't want to get the name wrong, but Jörn Hort. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. But the Swedish Steel Association, and who heads the Energy and Environment Department there. Claude, the floor is yours.
Yes, there's
yeah, but that doesn't help. Good morning, everybody. So, I think I have two challenges. One is to give you a bit my view on European energy policy, but what I understood also from the discussions yesterday is that at least for some of you, Brussels is still something in between a very weak leadership and a technocratic dictatorship. So I will also try to basically make you a bit better understand what we are doing, at least from my perspective, which is the perspective of one of the directly elected member of the European Parliament. And you know that all European legislation is basically European Commission proposing but not deciding, and then we have these co-decisions between the European Parliament on one hand and the 28 governments on the other hand. And by the way, I have a €2 coin from Luxembourg. I don't know if anybody is interested. I think I will trade it against a €5 coin from anywhere or a peso. Good. And let's do one test before I go to my speech. So the Sunday a week before, there were European elections. Just to get the feeling who went to vote, a few. Oh, that's good. That's much more than the average. So well done. Good. Then I think I have to probably not to go so deep into making you understand why Europe is important for your agenda. What are the challenges ahead? Of course, in these days we are speaking very much on energy security, and yes, I read also through this document. It's a typical document a bit from the European Commission. It's addressing some good things, but there's also a lot of things missing. And the other issue which is very hot on the table is what President Tusk is talking about, which is this energy union. And this energy union for Europe is something which puzzles me enormously, because on one hand it suggests that we don't really have a European energy policy. And you can imagine, as somebody who was basically doing the internal market second package, the renewable directives, the efficiency directive, eco-design, near zero energy houses, another building directive, CO2 and cars. There is a European energy policy. So the question is more how, with all this noise which happens in politics, you have an event like the Russian crisis, and then all kind of lobbies just try to hijack that for their own purpose. So Tusk's energy union is nothing else as suggesting that Poland should be allowed to keep strong on coal and to open the door for shale gas. Whereas we, of course, will say the Russian crisis is the ultimate reason for us to be more efficient in Europe. So that's also something which I want to discuss with you on how do we keep track in a world where we have this noise popping up every week or second week or every 6 months where we try to go into another direction. Whereas I think there are some fundamentals which are so crystal clear that our agenda of putting energy efficiency as the first fuel is absolutely obvious. The first of that is, of course, one planet, 7 billion inhabitants today, 10 billion inhabitants in 2050. And without going to the details today of the last IPCC climate change or Stockholm University research on how much biodiversity and so we lose, for me it's evident that if this one planet with these 10 billion inhabitants is not to be a place where we fight each other for the last resources, we must be excellent in resource management. We are in a world of scarce resources. We are in a world of ecosystems which are already in the red, and we will add another 3 billion inhabitants. So for me it's so evident that the deep driver of everything which we have to do in the next years is resource efficiency and management of ecosystems, and try to keep them in their ecological boundaries. And for climate change, this is probably somewhere between 1.5 or 2 degree maximum raise. Russia geopolitics. We are in Europe on a continent with very scarce resources. Our oil is over the peak, our gas is over the peak, we don't have a lot of rare earths, and so on and so on. So we are a continent which can only compete if we are also for industrial reasons excellent in optimizing all kind of energy resources and also all kind of other resources. And the only way to be less dependent, be it from Russia, be it from Qatar, be it from China when it comes to rare earths, is to be efficient. I give you one figure. Last year in 2013, Europe bought for 500 billion euro oil and gas and coal from outside Europe. 500 billion. We spent 163 billion just to buy oil and gas from Putin country. 163 billion in 2013, whereas this figure was only 36 billion in the year 2000. So a continent where you have almost very little, let's say, hardcore resources, in a world where Chinese and Indian citizens also start to drive in cars, which will then lead to the fact that all kind of resources will be, I think, in tendency more expensive. So we need also for that reasons to be efficient. And then basically to come to your core business, which is optimizing industry processes, the competitivity of European industry, I think will above all depend on skilled staff being innovative. And in this skilled staff and innovation, with also a strong point on managing all kind of energy and other resources. There has been a lot of discussion, and András will come to this, raised by Business Europe and other, what I call the dirty business lobby in Brussels, on that we are losing out on energy prices. This is, of course, a biased discussion. Our electricity prices in Europe have been higher than those in US since 30 years. Did we lose any industry? No, because we were always a bit more efficient than the Americans. And when it comes to gas, be aware that through the shale gas boom in US, the gas price in US dropped, of course. But when you look to the statistics of IEA, you will quickly understand that drop is less deep than the rise of gas prices in Europe since 2007 or 8, because of the oil price indexation. So what kills us much more in competitivity when it comes to gas is that we were not able to organize an internal gas market and to have an external dimension to our gas policy in order to force Gazprom and others to go away from a principle which may have been right in the 70s, the oil price indexation, but which is something which doesn't make sense today. So competitivity on gas is getting rid of the oil price indexation, being better in the internal gas market, and then of course continuing to be as efficient as possible. The challenges ahead, and that's challenges which will not change whatever geopolitical short-term event will pop up. So, and that is because of climate change, resource scarcity, that analyzes on competitivity. My belief is that energy efficiency is the most important part of all energy policy. I have done the Renewable Energy Directive. Renewables is important. I'm so pleased that PV costs have cut down. I'm so pleased that we are doing very good technology developments on wind, that with the ICT we can integrate all this very rapidly into the electricity system. But much more important than renewable policy is efficiency policy, and one of the most important slides shown yesterday was the IEA slide on showing that efficiency already since the 70s is basically the first fuel. And I think it's very important also in your companies when you meet your CFOs and they're a bit over the top, basically pressure on you on payback times of 8 months or 1 year or whatever, is to show him that also in your company you have basically through the efficiency improvements that is the first fuel probably also in your own industry. So what have we done in Brussels over the last years? One is we have a program for soft policy, which is called the Energy Intelligent Europe program, which helps to basically build what Mr. Jochen advocated yesterday, which is networks. So for me, Europe is above all bringing people together like we do it today, and helps them to build up networks at European level, networks of excellence, and we sponsor, for example, also the Climate Alliance cities, which bring this pressure on local, or bring networks of local policy making together. The second very important policy, and András is one of the leaders of that policy, is eco-design. In 2002 and 2003, we came up with this idea to have framework directives for minimum standard setting, to combine it also with labeling, and so I think we have driven the efficiency of Europe very, very heavily with this very lean and unbureaucratic instrument which is eco-design. And of course, eco-design for cars is what we did on the CO2 and cars legislation. The single biggest oil geopolitical independence decision of Europe was to force the car industry to go to the 130 gram of CO2 in 15 and to 95 in 2020. So that's one area. The other area where we did big progress is buildings. We introduced transparency with the ABCD and so on labeling, and very important, we were able to win the principle of every new building in Europe will be a near zero energy building in 2020. That was a big success which we got through the parliament during the Swedish presidency, and that is completely, it's a Copernican change to the whole architects, engineers, real estate and so on. Every building in Europe, anywhere in Europe, small or big, will be a near zero energy building at the end of this decade. That's none other place in the world, not even California, had dares to be so ambitious, and we are moving ahead. Then, of course, on your area, what we did beneath eco-design is the EED, which is the Energy Efficiency Directive, which is a framework directive with two elements. One, Article 3, is about what is the target for Europe, and the second issue is what kind of instruments we enshrine in that framework in order to bring pressure on governments to deliver. In that directive, in Article 3, we have decided to go down with the primary energy use of Europe. To go down from 1700 something MTOEs to 1400 and something in 2020. So it's again a Copernican change. Since World War II, the primary energy use in Europe was going up. We have now decided that it will go down. And we are on the way to it through a combination of instruments in the building sector, but also we introduced the obligatory energy management and energy audits for the industry, and that's something which I want to discuss with you. Is that already delivering change? Is there a need to fine-tune and to basically make it more stringent in the next revision of the directive? We have also introduced, and that was at the end a bit my idea, a bridge between the efficiency world and the renewable world, which is demand-side management. So in this new energy efficiency directive, there is a whole new article about the obligation of member states and also of transmission system operators to favor demand-side as an equal opportunity of managing the load on the electricity grid, which gives, of course, also income possibilities for good management of the electricity in industry. And we have tried also to make a contribution to the financing dilemma of you as an engineer being squeezed by your CFO, who says payback is 1 year and you can have the most brilliant ideas, I will just not give you the waiver. And what we have basically tried to do through this energy efficiency directive is a generalization of the Danish energy saving obligation, which basically would allow to match, on one hand, the short-term financing constraints of the energy-intensive industry and small and medium enterprises with the more long-term approach of energy companies, which have 8, 10, 12 years perspective, because when you invest into supply, that's basically the payback time you have. And so, once again, I want also to discuss with you, is there already first signs that this kind of energy-saving obligation helps you in getting financing and in getting, let's say, third-party financing new actors into the investments? Where are we? So what's the next steps? The most important next step is implementation, implementation, implementation. As I told you in the beginning, don't believe a second that Mr. Tusk, through his energy union, wants to get a more stringent efficiency policy in Europe. He wants to dilute efficiency and renewable policy and to go back to coal and to open the door for shale gas. And we have to prevent that, and we have to tell Poland, Germany, France, Belgium, UK to implement the existing energy-saving directive. because in that you have the Article 9, which is an energy saving obligation, which is quite tough, and we need to keep them on track. Second is eco-design. There will be a revision of the eco-design framework. There is some populistic attacks, especially in Germany, on shower taps, and that we would now even regulate the toilets, and that is the ultimate example of this technocratic dictatorship from Brussels. Behind that, you have forces in Germany who basically don't like our eco-design push on their products. So we have to win this battle against this populistic, basically using some of the right-wing populistic arguments against one of the most efficient policies we have ever designed in Brussels, which is eco-design. Then we have the 2030 target discussion, which is basically the discussion beyond 2020. I did the Renewable Directive, I did the Efficiency Directive. So I know how good and how ambitious the 2020 framework is. And the biggest risk is that while discussing 2030 and saying we need now to look beyond 2020, there is a real risk that we will lose ambition on our policies which we have in place. And the concrete example is that is, if Europe will only do 27% of renewables in 2030, it goes down with ambition to what we have basically obliged member states to do between now and 2020. And the risk is that the same could happen for efficiency. The good news is that in the European Parliament, before we went to the European elections, in order to convince you to vote for us, we had a vote where we said Europe should have a binding energy efficiency target of at least 40% in 2030, and that's what we will continue to battle for. ETS, and I will basically try to wrap up then. EU ETS is a failure. It's a failure because there were so many loopholes introduced by Dirty Business Europe in that system that there were so many international credits that the system was flooded. And the system is on intensive care, and the risk is that it will never quit the intensive care station because there is 2.2 billion certificates too much in the system, and Tusk and BASF and Mittal and Tata don't want to get rid of this excess, which means that the system cannot recover. And I don't know today where we have the political majorities to change this. And what is even more annoying is that the same industries are saying to us as policymakers, we are under this terrible pressure of EU ETS. You have done something which outcompetes us against China and Brazil and US. Terrible pressure from EU ETS, which is of course complete nonsense. There is no pressure whatsoever from ETS on industry because of all kinds of loopholes and free allowances and so on and so on. And then they say, because we have this enormous pressure, don't dare a second to come up with other policy measures for all the industries which are under ETS. Which then leaves, of course, a whole sector which gives us 40% of all electricity used in Europe without any pressure to do anything. And that is also your problem, because if there is no... Yesterday somebody said, I need more commitment for my CEO. The best way to commit your CEO is somebody like me being able in Brussels to tell him, hey guy, your industry has also a responsibility. We will help you, but you have also to deliver, because that will change the engagement. Okay, I finish there. My message is maybe it's a critical. I'm critical to what we're doing, because I think we are in a race against time, especially against climate change. But what makes me every morning stand up and being an optimist is people like you. Here I'm in a room of, and my first test was showed it. You were more conscious than most Europeans that it is important to go to vote for the European elections, because that is a level of policy making which is important. And you are system thinkers. In policy we have too many lawyers, we have too many bankers. All these people have no system understanding. You are system thinkers because you optimize very complex industry processes, which allows you through your studies to understand that the biggest industrial process we have is this planet and its ecosystems. We need to understand, and we need more people on this earth to understand, that we are on a very fragile equilibrium of ecosystems which have their tipping points, and if we don't respect these tipping points, they will not respect us. You are among those who are system thinkers, and because Mandela didn't have a majority in South Africa to move this regime, but he had a critical mass. Everything on the world is a critical mass. You are the critical mass to move energy efficiency in industry. You are the critical mass we need to move climate and energy policy in Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claude. I think one of the key takeaways is that you presented is that there is an existing legislative framework that puts energy efficiency as the first fuel forward in Europe, but the key challenge is implement. One of the other key takeaways is that there's certainly a very big value of coming to this event, but also of sharing best practices, and a lot of the papers certainly contribute to that, of sharing experiences. You mentioned the energy efficiency obligation scheme. There's certainly been a lot of work and results in the US on energy efficiency resource acquisition schemes that are one means to involve more of the private sector to implement energy efficiency. Our next speaker, András from the European Commission, will present a recent policy communication on energy prices and energy costs in Europe that was adopted early January this year.
Thank you. I was hoping to be able to hide the fact that I'm not actually an energy prices and cost expert myself. I do work on eco-design and energy labeling, and I will make a presentation later during this summer study on a more related topic to my actual area of work. But I did consult before coming here with my colleagues in DG Energy who deal with energy prices and costs, and you will see that hopefully at the end of this presentation that this report actually links well into our discussions. So with that, I will start the presentation. I would say that for in January, the European Council asked the Commission to come up with a report on energy prices and costs. Sorry, it wasn't in January they asked it, but the Commission came up with the report and the communication on these aspects. And this report consists actually of 4 chapters. One dealing with the electricity and gas retail price developments, another with energy cost developments, a third one with energy prices in a global context, and the fourth one with the macroeconomic consequences of these future high energy prices in the EU. So first I will go through the main findings of the report, and then I will present you with a number of slides with graphs showing the different findings of the report, and I will conclude by telling you what the next steps will be as a follow-up and what conclusions we can draw for this summer study from this report. But first, a slide explaining the actual composition of the electricity gas bill. This report actually focused on gas and electricity and didn't focus on oil and coal, and the reason for that is that oil and coal prices are almost the same across the world. I mean, they are traded in a different way than gas and electricity, and therefore there is much less government intervention on the prices of those fuels. So this report chose to focus on electricity and gas. So the composition of electricity and gas bill is made of, first of all, energy costs. I realize that some of the text on the slide might not be quite readable, so the energy cost is made up of wholesale and retail costs or prices. Then there is the network element of the price from transmission and distribution, and taxes, levies and exemptions are the third element. This is the element set by governments, part of it going into the general budget and the other part going in for specific policies. That's where we also have the exemptions and stuff. So the main findings from the report are that the actual rise in retail prices has been influenced by market forces and government policy by up to 4% a year in recent years. The price differences across member states are large in retail electricity and gas across markets and have increased over time. That there is a disconnect between convergent wholesale markets and diverging national retail markets. And the convergence and fall in wholesale electricity prices has not resulted, strangely, in lower retail prices, which suggests that there is an inadequate implementation of the internal energy market acquis. Further findings are that the energy efficiency has only partially compensated price rises, and unfortunately energy costs have risen too. The energy price gap between the EU and major economic partners has increased in recent years. We also have at our disposal the policies that can keep prices in check and reduce our energy consumption and costs. And energy cost challenges call for a joint effort by the EU, national governments, industry and consumers. Now, let's take a look at what has driven electricity and gas prices. In this next slide, well, you actually see that the upper part shows how the electricity prices have developed for households between 2008 and 2012. The blue line represents the energy and supply part of the price, the red part the network, and the green part the taxes and levies. You see that the energy and supply, and the lower part of the graph is actually about industry between 2008 and 2011, the same electricity prices in industry. You will see that the way things changed was that the energy and supply part of the price hardly changed or even decreased in industry, whereas the other two elements, that is the network and the taxes and levies part of the price, substantially increased. This is not in line with the way that wholesale prices actually developed from a 2008 peak. They are quite low now compared to 2008. So the retail markets are actually not following these developments, and there are various reasons for this. When we look at these graphs, we have to take into account that these are actual averages, well, these are the different lines here show the actual development of regional electricity markets, but in any case they do not reflect what is going on in particular member states necessarily. So there is quite divergent trends in different member states, and what we are able to show here are the average trends in the EU. We observe a similar trend with gas prices. That you see that the electricity the energy and supply part of the graph of the price hasn't increased that much, but the taxes and the network costs are increasing. Now, so far we have been discussing about the price part, and we have to make a clear distinction between what prices are and what costs are. Because costs, the actual energy cost, the money that the the electricity and gas consumers have to pay depend also on other factors, and notably energy efficiency. So it could be that in spite of price developments, which were, as we saw, driven mostly by increasing network costs and increasing government taxes and levies, that in spite of these price developments, it could still well be that the energy costs are not increasing that much. So what we see, at least for households, that in households, well, this is a breakdown by member state. And at the bottom of the graph, you see the different member states, 2008 and 2011 data for each member state. You see that the actual consumer prices are increasing. So this shows that what is the weight of household energy products in the harmonized index of consumer prices, and you see that this is actually increasing. The different fuels that are listed there make up the vertical bars, and the heat energy is actually district heating, which is, as you see, important in some member states and less important in other member states. So this has also social implications. There is an increasing number of households who are unable to keep their homes adequately warm. This can range from rather large extremes, like in Bulgaria on the left, which is clearly in the worst situation, whereas I think on the other end you would find Luxembourg somewhere at the middle of the slide. So here again there are quite some disparities across the EU about the social implications of this energy price increase. The level of exposure of industry to these high energy prices is quite different across the industry sectors. So the energy costs in the total production costs graph shows that on the left-hand side there is the transport equipment industry, followed by machinery, and then food, drinks, and tobacco industry. The industrial average is shown with the red slide. Maybe I will not list everything. Roughly at the middle you find the chemical industry, and at the other end, with the highest energy cost in total production costs, you find the ore extraction industry. So you see that the industry exposure is quite different depending on the sector involved. Also, when we look at what drives the electricity consumption, which is actually falling, you see that the different industries again have different drivers. The red part in the graph shows the electricity intensity, which describes essentially the energy efficiency of that industry, and the blue part shows a drop in gross value added. That might be a sign of economic crisis, for instance. And you see that on the left-hand side you have the glass, pottery, and building mat industry, where the gross value added part is really overwhelming, whereas in the chemical industry there has been, on the right-hand side, there has been quite some improvement in the electricity intensity, and the gross value added drop hasn't been so important. Energy costs is that the households spend increasingly more on energy, and that the improved energy efficiency across the sectors has offset but not entirely compensated for the increase in household energy costs. And the reduction in energy intensity in most EU economies and the reduction in industrial electricity and gas consumption can be observed across the EU. And for some energy-intensive industries, the energy efficiency improvements and the restructuring towards higher value-added products, particularly offsetting increasing prices, is also an observation we can make. What we also see that the producers of internationally traded goods that face high share of electricity and gas costs are under increasing competitiveness pressure from lower-priced regions. To underpin this, I will show some slides on global energy price trends. The wholesale gas prices across the world, we see the evolution of these gas prices from 2007 until 2012, and Europe is the third one from the left, and it is only the Asia-Pacific region, which is the fifth one from the left, that compares in wholesale gas prices. We see that they have been lower in the world, and we see also on the parts on the second collection of graphs that represents North America. It shows the shale gas boom clearly. Again, the wholesale electricity prices in selected countries shows that the ones which are on the right-hand side, the green, orange, and the light blue ones are the EU lines, and they show that in 2013, starting from 2011 to 2013, they show that we have been in the upper part of the electricity prices across the world, and we are currently in the most expensive region. Now, EU industries do pay more for electricity and gas than the major trading partners. Again, in this graph on the left, we have the electricity end-use prices, on the right the gas end-use prices, and the EU average is in both cases the second part, the second red vertical bar in the graphs, and we see that they are actually much higher than the US, Canada, which are on the right-hand side, or at the very end for electricity prices we have the United Arab Emirates in the top graph. In the international price comparison, we also did particular studies of industry sectors, such as the steel case studies, comparing electricity prices in the EU and in the US. And here too we can see that between 2010 and 2012, the EU has had consistently higher prices than the US. Then the same can be observed for the gas prices in the EU and the US in the steel sector. Again, the price developments between 2008 and 2012, which is a change in real index of industrial end-use prices, shows that in Canada and the United States, especially the natural gas prices have dropped, and in the OECD Europe, on the other hand, they have especially increased for electricity, although the natural gas hasn't increased that much. And in terms of fossil fuel pricing, there are countries which operate large fossil fuel consumption subsidies. Neither of these are European countries. We have countries like Iran at the top, or Nigeria at the bottom, and Argentina and Egypt and China are also on the graph. China is in the higher part actually, and the different colors show oil, natural gas, coal, and electricity subsidies respectively, and the horizontal line is $1 billion up from 10 to 90 in 2012. Now this is a problem for the EU because we are actually the leading export market for energy intensive goods. I mean, we are leading in the export market for energy intensive goods. And this is shown on these vertical graphs. The left graph has 2011, and there is a projection as to what will happen in the future in 2020 and 2035. The lower dark blue part is the European Union's share in the export market for energy intensive goods, and then we have the United States and Japan and the rest of the OECD for the other blue parts, and China is yellow. Now this means that this dominant position, because we saw that there was a development in time, might be actually challenged by 2035. We see that there might be a 10% drop in the European Union's share in global export market for energy-intensive goods, whereas the other markets may gain shares. And the factors include the relatively high wages, the longer shipment distances to the major consumption centers in Asia, along with high energy prices. The EU's response to high energy prices has been, well, or will be, I would rather say, a range of actions. First of all, I think maybe this presentation did not highlight sufficiently the fact that even though the prices are on the rise, there is a differential with how energy costs are developing across the different sectors. So one important thing to do is to complete the internal wholesale and retail market, and because we think that competition will bring cost savings, and there will be an alignment of wholesale and retail prices, which is currently missing. Industry might think of switching energy supplier or energy procurement to obtain better prices. We can look at non-market elements such as network costs, taxes and levies in light of best practice. The governments might want to keep energy-financed energy and climate policies cost-effective, that is not impose such taxes and levies or other policy instruments which draw, I would say, such costs to industry and to households that make it cost ineffective. We can use, well, of course, more energy efficient products and processes, and for that we have a number of policy instruments in place, like the eco-design and energy labeling directives. We can ensure a level playing field in energy pricing, which is a bilateral action that we can do with the WTO. We can diversify suppliers and supply routes, and we can have a common European voice in negotiations with suppliers. And ultimately, we can protect vulnerable households and exposed industries, but there we have to be careful not to have a level policy which would simply push down electricity prices centrally and not differentiate between vulnerable and non-vulnerable households and industries. So I'm coming to my last slide. What we plan to do as a follow-up to this report is first a communication on the internal energy market, because we want to see why it is not why the retail market is so much decoupled from the wholesale market, and what we can do to empower the consumers to be more in control of their energy bills. And we are also going to take a closer look at the energy costs and subsidies to see how the different member states are providing different incentives to their industries, and in particular attention to be paid to whether these industries are indeed and how households are indeed in the vulnerable category. And this will come in autumn 2014. So with this, I will conclude my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
I think András's presentation again reminds us that just looking at energy prices is probably not the right picture. Looking at energy costs is more reflective of whether or not Europe can remain competitive, and especially the importance of energy efficiency in looking at how Europe can remain competitive. I think another takeaway, at least for me, is the importance of looking at competitiveness of industry, for example, but beyond just cost competitiveness. As you showed, Europe in many industries remains quite competitive and leading on the export market. Now, that doesn't say what the future will look like, but I think looking beyond just cost competitiveness is certainly quite very important. Our next speaker, Helen Axelsson from Young Port, we're going to get there, from the Swedish steel industry, is going to talk about energy efficiency and looking at the many aspects of energy efficiency from a steel sector's perspective.
Okay, I will teach you the järnkontoret, which means the steel office or iron office, if you translate it. Thank you. I will try to put some perspective on what energy efficiency actually means to industry, to process industry. And hopefully that will also meet the perhaps not so positive comment from Claude about the dirty business. Yesterday we heard Rob Borry saying that industry has to do it, and presenting a kind of some numbers on energy efficiency values. So what does that mean? What is it we have to do, and how can we do that? What's the conditions we need, and what do we need to support the work we have to do? In discussing this, I think it's quite important to define what energy efficiency is for process industry, because I believe that it's not just one thing, and you can't support it and you can't work on it with just one measure or one instrument. So that's the idea with this presentation, to give you a picture of different aspects on energy efficiency. To look into energy efficiency for process industry, of course we're talking about either you make the same product or the same use with less energy, or you make a better product or more usefulness with the same amount of energy. That's energy efficiency. Normally we look into the processes. That's a sort of first view from regulators and society. And since I represent steel industry, you have to cope with the steel example. We have a lot of hot processes. Our main big processes are hot. There are big investments, and that's where we use a lot of energy. So that's one part. Then you have support processes. That's what's around the hot processes. You have to have cooling, you have to have pumps, fans, etc. That requires other measures. Then we get a lot of waste energies. Especially in steel industry, we do nothing else than just heat and cool and heat and cool. And whether we can use it or lose it, that's also connected to the outside of the site, the society. We also get other residues. And then in the end, why do we do this? Why do we have these processes? Well, it's actually to make products. And that's where we can make the real energy efficiency, to make good products. And as you heard András saying, changing to more high value added for the products. And all these four parts need different approaches. And so what do we get? Well, we get competitiveness. And that's essential for actually having these industries, to making these products here in Europe, that we are competitive on the global market. So I'll go into these four parts. As I said, the main processes, the hot processes, this is where the big energy is used. This is where we can make the large efficiency changes. But it takes time, it takes research, and it has to be done together, industry and academia, and also governments and authorities. If we do it together, we can have the right sort of research, and we can have faster implementation. But then we can have also perhaps the long-term results. Some important aspects on this is that we work on a global market. There is a global production for our products. The slide, the picture in the bottom is actually one projection on steel production in the future. It will increase. As long as we build the world, it will increase. So somewhere the steel will be produced. And it might even be in Europe, which will be good for Europe. So being more efficient on energy and on carbon dioxide, of course, means we have to work together also on the global market, together with the global competitors, because these are techniques that take long time to develop. We have to value the balance between energy efficiency and carbon dioxide efficiency. What is most important? That's one part. Can we use biofuels? Everybody wants the biomass it should save the world from everything. Is that realistic to use that in industry, or should we use it somewhere else? Also the balance between electricity and fuels. What is more efficient to use? Maybe using fuels are more efficient than electricity. It also depends on how you produce the electricity. In Sweden we don't have gas, as you have most here in Europe. We're just a small part of Sweden which have had natural gas. So to us, the actually liquid natural gas is a possibility now that we can get it. We also have to handle the balance between material and energy. If we want to recycle more materials, which is efficient, resource efficient, as Claude was talking about, then perhaps we have to handle worse raw material in the future, which can mean that we have to use more energy. So how do we balance that? What is more important, the energy use or the material use? Concerning these main processes, we're talking about large, big investments and long time investments. These processes and equipments could last for 20 or even 50 years. So we are working with perhaps rather old equipment, and it takes time. You can always do something. That's important though. Going into support processes, this is not rocket science. This is known techniques. There are developing new pumps and new fans and new techniques to control them. It's about implementation. And the greatest obstacle for implementation of these techniques in process industry is actually that you risk to interrupt the process, the production. If the production stops, it costs a lot of money. So what we need here is networking, exchange of experience like this, and also between industry, between those who are actually working out there in the sites, to try to overcome these obstacles, to learn from each other. We can do this, you have to do it this way, and then you are lowering the risks. You also need organization. This is where all these a good organization in the company, if you have energy management systems, this is where it can make a big difference. You work in a organized way, and you have to have people. You have to have people who are out there looking, and then they can perhaps find how to do it. These are just some small examples. It's not a lot of energy you can save, but it's a lot of different actions. So in the end, perhaps here is the biggest possibility to find energy efficiency. Waste energy then. Then we come into something which is more close to what Claude is working with, what society wants, what policymakers want. Sometimes the attitude towards waste energies or residues is not that positive. If you call something a waste, it's potentially dangerous. But it's actually resources. And you heard Claude saying this is why we have to make the focus, resource efficiency. So here we can have a more positive attitude. We have a value for society. We can actually start looking into a cascaded way of seeing things. How can we use, for example, energy? We have the primary energy in industry, we use it in households, and in the end, perhaps in a value, a quality, which is good enough for the last process, but we have used the energy many times. The problem is here, how can we mix this? Who's taking responsibility to balance between societal needs and business? This is the tricky part. I have a quite good example from Sweden. It's a sewage plant in the south of Sweden where they produce biogas from the waste treatment. And then they realized that the plant just beside, which is a steel plant, they could use the biogas for producing hydrogen to their processes. And instead, they could bring back heat, which was actually what the sewage plant needed for their production. So it's a win-win situation. The sewage plant is actually now a net producer of energy instead of consuming. So this is a possibility to find local cooperation. And then the last part, of course, products. This is where we make the biggest steps. If we make products that are efficient in their final use, in the application, we can reduce energy in the end. We can meet demands of higher quality materials, and we can use less resources. And perhaps this is where the focus should be for industry, because this is the real important parts. Some examples. As we heard before, talking about the demands on the car industry to reduce emissions. Well, one part of this might be this pump. It's a pump for diesel injection, and it requires very high pressure. And to get that high pressure, if you get it, you can reduce fuel consumption, you get a better combustion. But to do that, you need very, very clean, high purity steel. So to be able to reduce emissions and energy use in a car, we need better material. And to make that material, perhaps you need a little bit more energy in the production. Also, when it comes to windmills, you have these large windmills, you want to put them offshore. You don't want them to break down. So the ball bearings might be 4 meters in diameter. You really want them to hold for the lifetime of the windmill. Also requires very efficient material. I will skip this because my time is running out. For industry, I think the conditions for competitiveness in the future is having to adapt to the customers. The customers want better material, more flexible product development, faster supply, and we have to adapt that. We have to be flexible. At the same time, we have to be efficient in production, of course. And what would be optimal would be to use the production capacity for a maximum. That's when you are most efficient in these kind of processes. So at the same time, you should be flexible. You should produce different kinds of products, but still have a full production going on, a minimum of loss. So that's the balance for industry. What we need to do that is, of course, energy and raw material. We need it stable supply of that, and the raw material, of course, that's a global market. But energy is usually quite a local or regional market. And what we see now is a bit unsure future when it comes to stability and security. Of course, prices are important, but it also, we need the stability. We need electricity and energy every day, every hour, all the year round to be able to produce efficient. And sometimes you hear proposals that the industry should be flexible. The industry should vary their production according to whether we have electricity or not. And really that's very, very difficult. And I think that's perhaps not what industry should do. Industry should be flexible towards the customer, but not towards the energy system, because that would mean it just wouldn't work. So really, what should industry do then? Coming back to the work in the companies, well, I think energy management systems, energy audits, which we have in the Energy Efficiency Directive, that's a good way. I think the industry needs to have, the companies needs to have energy on the table of the boards. We need to make a strategy, we need to make plans, and we need to have people working with it. We should focus R&D on the life cycle, and we should focus on the products, because that's where the big steps can be taken. And just coming out of that, energy will be part of the core business. You need people, you need to educate your staff, you need to work systematic, and also following your energy use, of course. This is what companies should focus on. And then to the policymakers, what can they do? Well, I think it's important to realize that this is complex. It's not just a one-way track to be most efficient. We have to include the products as well, not just focus on the production here and now. We do very lot of useful things for the global market. So if you realize that, then you have to sort of go on. Competence, knowledge is very important. There's no really use to put a cap on energy usage. Energy efficiency, that's important, but as we now have targets for that capping the energy use, I don't think that is realistic. System cooperation, of course, the cascade thinking, and also a responsibility for energy supply. And the industry needs it every day, every hour, and of course, competitive costs. Thank you.
Building on some of the concepts that you mentioned, there have been a lot of discussions about energy efficiency networks. I'd say in this presentation, building more around or extending that notion to resource efficiency networks or systems cooperation is certainly a very important element. Another element is bringing energy to the boardroom and the notion of continuous energy management and energy systems. And perhaps on a positive note, I mean, from what I gather from these 3 presentations, that competitiveness, sustainability, and energy security are not incompatible notions and actually go very much hand in hand. I'd like to invite the audience if there are any questions. I'd say we can take probably maximum 3 or 4 before the coffee break. Please go ahead.
Yes, hello. My name is Volker Franz. I'm working with ABB. I have a question on one mighty European policy tool, which is the Eco-Design Directive. Claude has called it one of the most powerful energy policy tools the EU does have, and as a company representative, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it has already, and it's likely to continue to change entire markets, to impose minimum efficiency requirements below which a product cannot be sold in Europe. That's mighty. But I have a question, or basically several questions on its future. Maybe to András and Claude a bit directed the question, how can we avoid, or how can we walk the thin line between, on the one hand, technocratic opacity, and on the other hand, populist stalemate, so to say. I mean, when you're, I'm German, I followed the debate where shower heads and light bulbs have made it into the election campaigns of the European Parliament elections. We're saying, the socialist, social democratic Spitzenkandidat said, with me, this is not going to be possible to in the future. That something like efficiency standards on shower heads will be decided on in the future. So how can we change or not change, or better communicate on the Eco-Design Directive to ensure that this continues to be a powerful tool? And the second question, maybe a bit more to Helen, but also the others, is it possible to, or to what extent is the Eco-Design Directive a tool to capture system efficiency in not only products? Not only say, okay, we have a motor here and we impose a specific threshold, but to look at the whole system. How would it maybe have to be changed? Is it possible or not to capture system efficiency? Thanks.
The floor is yours.
So on the issue of eco-design, the first thing is that when Schulz or CDU or AFD are coming up with this, let's take the shower heads. Where is the problem if Europe does labeling of shower heads? Where is the problem? Wouldn't it be good for consumers in Europe when you go to a showroom of bathroom products, and when you would see this is a shower head which is A and this is one which is F. Nothing more, nothing less. And then you do your own decision. If you want to be under a kind of a tropical rain, you go for the F. If you are conscious that will cost you or the society, you go for another shower head. So the first thing is, and I did it, I defend the light bulb ban because it made sense, and I defend shower heads labeling because it makes sense. It makes also sense to have labels for toilet flushes. Knowing if it is an A or an F, it makes completely sense. And it makes sense to do it at European level, because otherwise, come on, should we have labeling for Bulgarian toilets, and for Romanian toilets, and for Portuguese toilets? So the first thing is, you need to stand up and to say, this is an unfair populistic attack. What we are doing makes a lot of sense. And then the second issue is, we need, now with the revision, I think there is a question of how can we trigger some automatisms. And that's the bridge to the Japanese top run. I think, and I have followed this for 10 or 15 years now in Brussels, it took us 6 years too late, too much, to come back to refrigerators labeling. Because, of course, there was opposition in the system to go for next wave of labels. And I think that if we take the best ideas of Japan, which is to say, look, if a certain product has, let's say, if the best product has a 10% market share, then automatically you trigger a next, more ambitious. So that will also allow, with the scarce stuff that András is probably one of those European civil servants which is not in compatibility with the European Working Time Directive. They have too much work today with revising individual eco-design standards, and I think going in the revision to have some triggering of going to top runner makes sense. So that's a bit my approach, and then of course the issue of how much we have an instrument which eco-design. Eco-design is damn good in getting energy down. It can also, I think, help on water. But now the dilemma we are facing is how can we also use eco-design for resource efficiency? And how complex can you make one single policy instrument? And that's something where in my eyes, we have to be careful. Because you can also kill an instrument by overloading it. If you get 25 or 30 criteria to be respected in eco-design legislation, then you kill it. So I would rather keep eco-design on where it is strong, which is some easy to, so it's energy, water, and I think on other resource efficiency, we need a more system approach, which you cannot get through a single policy instrument.
Helen, perhaps you also have some thoughts on.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I will. I fully concur with what Claude said. I can only add that and underline that eco-design is an internal market instrument in the first place. Actually, this is an answer to both of the questions in the end. Because if you read the directive, there are two objectives. One is to ensure the free circulation of goods by supplanting national rules with harmonized EU-level rules. And the other objective is environmental protection by improving the product's environmental performance. This also means that I think if populistic campaigns start questioning whether we should have such product policy, then we should also start questioning whether we should have product safety policy in the EU. I think everyone takes it for granted that all products have to be safe. And another thing which have been taken for granted, at least in the past decades, was that products should also circulate freely. If you put the two things together, then you get the need for a harmonized policy. I would argue that energy efficiency and the environmental performance of products are also very similar to safety concerns. They concern in the end safety in the future, our safety in a more broader sense in the future. So it makes perfect sense to cover them with similar new approach type of legislation which ensures free circulation of goods. And this is the message that we should somehow try to pass. And in case there is a general doubt in the EU whether there should be free circulation of products, then I would like to see that argument brought up and discussed then for all policies which relate to products, not just eco-design. Because you remember the rules about cucumbers and all the debate whether cucumbers should be straight or not. Well, that's not product safety, and maybe that's where EU policy is going a bit too far. But I would see the moment when people start standing up and saying, no, we don't want common EU rules on product safety. Then this is also an answer to the second question, because it also limits the policy to some extent, because the instruments that we have in place, at least in the current directive, are really product-based instruments. So there is limited, I would say, improvements that we can achieve at system level. We managed to, we tried and I think managed to stretch the limits of the directive, for instance, in the electric motors regulation, where we were trying to tie the requirements somehow to the fact whether the product is marketed with a variable speed drive or not. But this approach has its limitations. We call it the extended product approach. And in many areas, as soon as we go into a more broader debate, discussion of systems, we bump into other legislation. This is the case with the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, where we are already a bit overlapping with the technical building systems approach. In industry, maybe there is more scope, but there we run into market surveillance issues. The market surveillance mechanism we have in place in the directive actually allows only to do spot checks and self declarations. And I think that that won't work with industrial installations, for instance.
I do agree. We cannot handle everything with one single instrument, and the system efficiency perhaps need other instruments. I also agree that the eco-design legislation should be used with care. We can't handle all products either. Now we're actually talking about industrial furnaces in the eco-design directive, and also that you have to have some limits. Most of that kind of equipment is site-built and perhaps nothing you buy in the shops. So eco-design directive is excellent for certain products. You need to be careful when you choose which products, and also don't make it too complicated.
Thank you. Eric, I know you had a question. I guess my question to you, is it a statement or a question? Because if it's a statement, you're more than welcome.
He promised me a question.
Okay.
I've got it from yesterday.
No, but actually a statement would probably be better, because I'm not sure we have time for that.
I have a lot of statements and a lot of questions, but actually now I only have one, and actually it's to Helen. And even though you had a wonderful presentation, I have one question to you. Have you examined the commitment from the top management in Swedish industry? Because I'm always wondering, you have all this list of barriers and needs you have to solve. And then you can find Volvo truck in US, they have saved 28% in 2 years. You can find a flash scrap factory in Korea, they have saved 30%. So how comes that the industry in Sweden can't do it? So have you examined the commitment of the top management?
I think it's quite different in different companies, and there is still possibilities to increase the commitment, and that's why I said get the energy issue on the board, because I think it's what we have is we have the companies are, the company leaders are followed up with economic key values, but I think energy also have to be up there, and there is still work to be done, but we see improvements and very good examples in some companies, so I think we are getting there.
Thank you, Helen. If you can join me in thanking the panel speakers today. It's been I very much enjoyed chairing the panel. I'll now invite you to the coffee break, which is actually just outside, and this afternoon's coffee break will be near the panel rooms, and the panel sessions begin at 11. Thank you very much. I'll now invite you to the coffee break, which is actually just outside, and this afternoon's